My name is Rachel Anderson, and at 32, I've learned that appearances can be deceiving. While my wealthy relatives flaunted designer clothes and luxury cars at our annual family conference, they never suspected I was quietly building an empire. The whispers about my modest lifestyle and poor choices stung until the day they crossed a line by publicly mocking my inability to afford a house. Little did they know, I owned the very building most of them called home. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from. Hit that like button and subscribe to join my journey of sweet karma and financial freedom. I grew up watching my single mother stretch every dollar to make ends meet. Our small two-bedroom apartment in the less desirable part of town was a far cry from the sprawling homes my extended family enjoyed in their gated communities. Mom worked 2 jobs, her hands always rough from cleaning houses during the day and waiting tables at night, determined to give me opportunities she never had. While we never went hungry, there was a constant awareness that we were different from the rest of the Anderson clan. My cousin Melissa would arrive at family gatherings in new designer outfits each time, while I wore the same dress with different accessories, a trick Mom taught me to look refreshed without spending money we didn't have. Uncle Robert, my father's older brother who took over the family business after my grandfather passed, never missed an opportunity to remind Mom that she wouldn't be struggling if she had made better choices. What they never acknowledged was that my father abandoned us when I was 3, leaving Mom with debt and a toddler to raise alone. Despite our circumstances, Mom instilled in me a fierce work ethic and financial wisdom that would prove more valuable than any inheritance. She taught me to save aggressively, invest wisely, and never confuse net worth with self-worth. I worked part-time jobs throughout high school, saving every penny for college. While my cousins received brand new cars for their 16th birthdays, I took the bus and eventually purchased a 10-year-old Honda with my own savings. The contrast between our lifestyles became even more apparent when I earned a scholarship to study finance at the State University. At family gatherings, my achievement was overshadowed by Melissa's acceptance to an Ivy League school her parents paid for in full. After graduation, I faced more struggles than my privileged cousins could imagine. The financial crisis hit just as I entered the job market, and I bounced between temporary positions for 2 years before landing an entry-level job at a local investment firm. During this time, the annual Anderson Family Conference became increasingly difficult to endure. Started by my grandfather as a way to keep our expanding family connected, the conference had evolved into a status competition where everyone shared their professional achievements, vacation highlights, and recent luxury purchases. Aunt Patricia, who married into wealth and never worked a day in her life, would inspect my outfit and accessories with a critical eye before declaring something like, "How brave of you to shop at those discount stores." Even my choice to rent a modest apartment instead of stretching myself thin with a mortgage became fodder for ridicule. "Renting is just throwing money away," Uncle Robert would lecture, oblivious to the fact that I was methodically building my savings. What my family didn't know was that I was living significantly below my means, saving over 60% of my income while they accumulated debt maintaining their lavish lifestyles. By 28, I had saved enough for a down payment on a small fourplex. I lived in one unit and rented out the others, essentially living for free while building equity. This first investment property taught me valuable lessons about building, maintenance, tenant relations, and property management. I reinvested the profits and continued my strategy of aggressive saving. Within 2 years, I purchased a second property, then a third. Each acquisition became easier as my portfolio grew. I formed an LLC to manage my growing real estate business, operating under a company name rather than my own to maintain privacy. Meanwhile, I continued my day job, earning promotions and raises that further accelerated my investment capability. My family remained oblivious to my growing wealth because I deliberately maintained my modest lifestyle. I drove the same reliable car, wore simple but quality clothing, and never flashed status symbols. Mom had passed away from cancer the year after I purchased my first property, And I grieved not only for her, but for the fact that she never got to see the fruits of the wisdom she had planted in me. Her absence made family gatherings even more isolating, as she had been my buffer and ally against their subtle cruelty. Cousin Melissa had followed her parents' example, working in the fashion industry and documenting her lavish lifestyle on social media. Her husband came from money too, and together they projected an image of perfect success. Uncle Robert continued to expand the family business, building his personal brand as a business guru while treating his employees poorly. Aunt Patricia had become the family's social gatekeeper, organizing charity galas not for the causes but for the networking opportunities with other wealthy families. They were exactly what society pictures when thinking of successful people, while I remained the family's poor relation in their eyes. By the time I was 32, my real estate portfolio had grown substantially. I had properties across 3 states and was earning more from my investments than from my day job, though I maintained my position for the health insurance and to keep up appearances. The irony of my situation became apparent when I discovered, through property records, that several of my relatives lived in Westview Terrace, a luxury apartment complex that had recently come on the market. The building was owned by a development company facing bankruptcy, creating an opportunity for a savvy investor. When I realized that Uncle Robert, Cousin Melissa, and several other family members all rented units in this building while their forever homes were being built or renovated, I couldn't resist the perfect opportunity for poetic justice. The cream-colored invitation arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday, embossed with gold lettering announcing the annual Anderson Family Conference at the Grand Wellington Hotel, the most exclusive venue in the city. I traced my finger over the raised letters, remembering last year's disaster when Uncle Robert had called me out for still driving that junker and asked if I needed financial assistance in front of everyone. The humiliation had burned for weeks. I almost tossed the invitation in the trash, but something stopped me. This year felt different. My phone rang as I was contemplating the invitation. It was Tanya, my best friend since college, and the only person who fully understood my complicated relationship with wealth and my family. "Did you get the royal summons?" she asked, knowing the invitations went out this week. "Just opened it," I replied, sinking into my couch. "The Grand Wellington, no less. Uncle Robert must be feeling especially flush this year. Are you going?" "After last year's fiasco, I wouldn't blame you for skipping it," Tanya said. I could hear the protective anger in her voice. Tanya had picked up the pieces after many family gatherings, witnessing firsthand how their comments chipped away at my confidence despite my financial success. "I'm thinking I might," I said slowly, an idea forming. "Remember that property I've been looking at for the past few months? Westview Terrace? The luxury apartment complex? Didn't you say it was out of your price range?" Tanya asked. "The owner dropped the price last week. They're desperate to sell before facing foreclosure. And guess who I discovered lives there while their McMansions are being built or renovated? Uncle Robert, Aunt Patricia, Cousin Melissa and her husband, and at least 4 other family members." The line went quiet as Tanya processed this information. "Rachel Anderson, are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" she finally asked, excitement creeping into her voice. "My LLC already submitted an offer. If everything goes through, I'll own the building before the family conference next month." "Oh my God," Tanya breathed. "That's some serious power move energy. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" I hesitated, considering the potential fallout. Was this revenge or just good business? The property had solid financials and fit perfectly within my investment strategy. The family connection was merely a coincidental bonus. "It's a sound investment," I said firmly. "The fact that it might finally earn me some respect from the family is just icing on the cake." The following weeks were a flurry of paperwork, inspections, and negotiations. I worked closely with my real estate attorney to ensure everything was handled properly, especially given the complexity of becoming landlord to my own relatives. We structured the deal carefully, keeping my name off any paperwork they might. See, with everything running through my LLC, Anderson Investments. The name was hiding in plain sight, but my family was too self-absorbed to make the connection. 3 days before the conference, I received confirmation that the deal would close the following morning. I would officially own Westview Terrace, along with the long-term leases of 7 family members who had no idea their rent checks would soon be contributing to my wealth instead of a faceless corporation's. The morning of the conference, I stood before my closet, contemplating what to wear. In previous years, I'd tried to blend in with department store approximations of designer clothes, always falling short of their standards. This year, I chose differently. I selected a simple black dress from a sustainable brand, minimalist jewelry, and comfortable flats. I wouldn't try to compete on their terms anymore. I packed the final contract for Westview Terrace in my leather portfolio, along with some other investment documents. My phone buzzed with a text from my property manager confirming the transfer of ownership was complete. It was official. I now owned the roof over my relatives' heads. The drive to the Grand Wellington took 40 minutes from my modest neighborhood. I passed Westview Terrace on the way, its gleaming glass facade and manicured entrance now technically mine. A strange feeling washed over me, a mixture of pride, anxiety, and something like power. I hadn't bought the building to lord it over my family, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction of finally having tangible proof of my success on my own terms. I valeted my car at the hotel, ignoring the barely concealed look of disdain from the attendant at my older model Honda. The lobby was opulent, with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. I spotted cousin Melissa immediately, holding court near the check-in desk, designer handbag prominently displayed on her arm. She was talking loudly about her recent trip to the Maldives, ensuring everyone within earshot knew exactly how exclusive her resort had been. I tried to slip past unnoticed, but she caught my eye. "Rachel, you actually came," she exclaimed, looking me up and down with barely concealed judgment. "Love that dress. Is that from that new sustainable collection?" "So, practical of you to think about the environment." Her tone made it clear that practical was not a compliment. Before I could respond, I overheard Uncle Robert's booming voice from across the lobby. "Who let their car service driver into the conference?" he joked to his golf buddies, looking directly at me. "Oh wait, that's just my niece." His friends chuckled as I felt heat rise to my cheeks. This was exactly why I'd almost skipped this year. As I made my way toward the conference room, I passed more relatives engaged in what seemed like a competition of consumption. Aunt Patricia was showing off her new diamond bracelet to her sister. My cousin Derek was describing the features of his new European sports car. 2 of my younger cousins were comparing their upcoming exotic vacations. No one asked about my life or seemed remotely interested in anything beyond appearances. I clutched my portfolio tighter, the weight of the documents inside giving me courage. Today, whether they realized it or not, the dynamic was about to change. For once, I had something none of them had: ownership of the very walls that sheltered them. The Grand Wellington's Platinum Ballroom lived up to its name with soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. White-gloved servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres as family members greeted each other with air kisses and backhanded compliments. I accepted a glass of champagne and found a quiet corner to observe the room. My cousin Blake nodded in my direction but didn't come over. We had been close as children before status and money created an invisible barrier. Now he was a corporate lawyer with the right address and the right connections, firmly in Uncle Robert's orbit. Aunt Patricia spotted me and made her way over, her Botoxed face attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rachel, darling, how are you?" she asked, giving me a quick once-over. "Still working at that little investment firm?" The way she said "little" made it sound like I was selling pencils on a street corner rather than managing millions in assets for high-net-worth clients. "I am," I replied simply. "It's going well." She nodded distractedly, clearly uninterested in details. And you're still in that apartment in… What was that neighborhood called again? Forest Hills, I supplied. Yes, actually, I'm quite happy there. She patted my arm condescendingly. Well, that's what matters, isn't it? Being content with what you have. Not everyone needs a 4-bedroom home in Lakeview Heights like Melissa just purchased. You always were the practical one. Before I could respond, Uncle Robert clinked his glass loudly, signaling the official start of the family conference. Everyone moved toward the large oval table at the center of the room, finding their assigned seats. I noticed with irritation that I'd been placed between 2 empty chairs at the far end of the table, effectively isolated from the main conversation. Uncle Robert stood at the head of the table, chest puffed out in his tailored suit. Welcome, Andersons. Another year, another family conference. As the steward of our family legacy since my father's passing, I couldn't be prouder of how we've all continued to uphold the Anderson name in business and society. He launched into a pompous speech about family prestige and accomplishment, dropping names of politicians and celebrities he'd recently golfed with. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes, sipping my champagne instead. Now, as is tradition, let's go around the table and share our yearly updates, Uncle Robert continued. Melissa, why don't you start us off? Melissa straightened in her chair, her diamond earrings catching the light. Well, as some of you already know, Brandon and I just closed on our dream home in Lakeview Heights. 5,000 square feet. Pool, tennis court, the works. We're also renovating our apartment at Westview Terrace as an investment property once we move. Oh, and I was named creative director at Lux magazine last month, so we celebrated with 3 weeks in Europe. The compliments and congratulations flowed around the table. Each family member tried to outdo the last with tales of promotions, property acquisitions, luxury purchases, and exotic vacations. When my turn came, all eyes turned to me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. I've been making some investments, I said simply. Nothing fancy, but I'm building for the future. Uncle Robert chuckled. Always the cautious one. When are you going to take some risks, Rachel? That's how real wealth is built, not by squirreling away pennies. The table erupted in patronizing laughter. I bet she's got it all in a savings account earning 0.5% interest, quipped my cousin Derek, who worked in finance but ironically carried massive credit card debt according to family gossip. Some people just don't have the instinct for wealth building, said Aunt Patricia with a theatrical sigh. It's nothing to be ashamed of, dear. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that patience would make the eventual revelation all the sweeter. Then Melissa delivered the blow that would change everything. At least tell me you're finally looking at real estate, she said, swirling her champagne. Honestly, Rachel, at your age, still renting? It's like you're allergic to equity. I shook my head. I'm comfortable with my choices. God, that's so sad, Melissa continued, looking around the table for validation. Can you imagine being 32 and not even able to afford a house? Meanwhile, Brandon and I can barely decide which property to focus on renovating first. The table tittered with laughter, and even those who weren't actively participating smiled behind their napkins. Well, we can't all be born with financial literacy, Uncle Robert added with faux sympathy. Some people just need more guidance. Rachel, if you'd like, I could have my financial advisor take a look at your situation. Pro bono, of course, as family. I felt a flush of anger rising from my chest to my face. For years I'd endured these jabs, telling myself their opinions didn't matter. But something in me snapped when I saw the genuine pity in my younger cousin's eyes. The poor relation, the family charity case, the financial failure. None of them had any idea that I could buy and sell most of them several times over. And now, with the Westview Terrace acquisition, I had concrete proof of my success that even they couldn't dismiss. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water, letting the condensation cool my fingers as I gathered my thoughts. The room continued to buzz with self-congratulatory conversations, no one paying attention to my internal struggle. With careful movements, I reached for my leather portfolio and placed it on the table in front of me. "Actually," I said, my voice quieter than usual, but somehow cutting through the chatter, "I do have something I'd like to share with the family." Uncle Robert looked annoyed at the interruption to his carefully orchestrated event. "Yes, Rachel? Did you forget something during your update?" His tone suggested whatever I had to say couldn't possibly be important. "I mentioned I've been making some investments," I continued, opening my portfolio and removing the Westview Terrace contract. "I thought you might be interested in my most recent acquisition." Curiosity flickered across a few faces, though most continued their side conversations. Melissa checked her phone. Aunt Patricia adjusted her bracelet. My cousin Blake seemed genuinely interested, leaning forward slightly. "As of yesterday morning," I said, my voice growing stronger, "I am the new owner of Westview Terrace." The name hung in the air for a moment before recognition dawned. Uncle Robert laughed dismissively. "Westview Terrace? The luxury apartment. Complex downtown? Don't be ridiculous, Rachel." I slid the contract across the table toward him. "Anderson Investments, LLC. That's my company. I've owned it for 4 years now, along with 12 other properties across 3 states. Westview Terrace is just the latest addition to my portfolio." The room fell silent as Uncle Robert scanned the document, his face transitioning from amusement to confusion to disbelief. "This can't be right," he muttered, flipping through the pages. "Westview Terrace is worth millions. 27 million to be exact," I replied calmly, though I negotiated them down to 22 given their financial situation. Melissa's phone clattered to the table. "Wait, Westview Terrace? Our Westview Terrace? Where we live?" Her voice had risen an octave. "Where you, Brandon, Uncle Robert, Aunt Patricia, Derek, Jason, and Linda all currently live," I confirmed, naming all my relatives who rented there. "Yes, that Westview Terrace." The silence was deafening as the implications sank in. 7 members of my family, all of whom had variously mocked, pitied, or dismissed me over the years, were now my tenants. All those rent checks they wrote each month would now be going into my bank account. Aunt Patricia recovered first, her social training kicking in. "Well, this is surprising, Rachel. You've kept your success very quiet." Her tone suggested this was somehow underhanded of me. "I prefer to let my investments speak for themselves," I replied. "Unlike some people, I don't measure my worth by what others think of it." Uncle Robert had moved from disbelief to anger, his face flushing. "Let me see that," he demanded, snatching the contract from Melissa, who had been examining it with wide eyes. "This has to be some kind of mistake or prank." I pulled out additional documentation from my portfolio. Property deed, transfer of ownership, current rent rolls, maintenance records, bank statements. "No mistake, Uncle Robert. I own the building. Where most of you live." I hadn't planned to reveal the full extent of my portfolio, but the momentum carried me forward. I also own the office complex where Brandon's architecture firm leases space, 3 commercial properties downtown, and residential buildings in Chicago and Austin. My net worth currently sits at just over $60 million, and I've achieved all of this without anyone's help or connections. The room erupted in chaos. Uncle Robert insisted the documents must be forgeries. Melissa vacillated between shock and attempts to suddenly frame us as fellow real estate investors. Derek demanded to know how I'd accumulated such wealth in secret. Aunt Patricia looked as though she might faint. Only Blake smiled, slowly at first, then breaking into outright laughter. "This is the greatest thing I've ever seen," he declared, raising his glass in my direction. To Rachel, who just schooled all of us in the art of actual wealth building while we were busy buying sports cars and posting vacation photos. Uncle Robert rounded on him. "This isn't funny, Blake. She's been deliberately deceiving the family." Deceiving, I challenged, finding my voice growing stronger with each word. By what standard? I never lied about my financial situation. You all just assumed I was struggling because I didn't flaunt designer labels or brag about luxury vacations. Not once did any of you actually ask me about my investments or financial strategy. You were too busy talking about yourselves. I stood up, gathering my documents. The irony is that while you were all looking down on me for being financially illiterate, I was building real wealth and financial independence, and now I'm your landlord. Melissa's husband, Brandon, who had been suspiciously quiet, finally spoke up. Does this mean you'll be raising our rent? The naked self-interest in his question after everything that had just been revealed spoke volumes. I'll be reviewing all leases and property operations with my management company, I replied coolly. All decisions will be made based on market conditions and property performance, not personal relationships. I looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes directly. I didn't buy Westview Terrace because you all live there. I bought it because it was a sound investment with strong returns. The fact that you're my tenants is merely a coincidence, albeit an illuminating one. Uncle Robert had recovered enough to attempt damage control. Well, this is certainly unexpected, he said, forcing joviality into his voice. But of course, we're all proud of your success, Rachel. It's quite impressive, really. You should have told us sooner. Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. Or would you have dismissed it as impossible because it didn't fit your narrative about me? His silence was answer enough. The elegant ballroom that had moments before been filled with superficial harmony now resembled the aftermath of a bomb detonation. Family members huddled in small groups, whispering frantically while shooting glances in my direction. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically that no one quite knew how to proceed. Uncle Robert was attempting to call the meeting back to order, his authoritative voice now tinged with uncertainty. Let's all take a moment to collect ourselves, he announced, straightening his tie as if physically adjusting his dignity. We still have family business to discuss. But the damage was done. No one was interested in the carefully planned agenda anymore. All eyes were on me, reassessing years of interactions through this new lens. Melissa abandoned her usual poise, rushing over to my side with an ingratiating smile. Rachel, sweetie, I always knew you were smart with money, she gushed, placing her hand on my arm. Remember when we were kids and you always saved your allowance while I spent mine immediately? I should have taken notes. I gently but firmly removed her hand. Funny, I remember you calling me cheap and boring for that exact behavior. Her smile faltered, but she pressed on. Kids say the silliest things. I've always admired your discipline. And now look at you, a real estate mogul. We should get lunch soon. Compare investment strategies. Brandon and I are looking to expand our portfolio too. I noticed Brandon across the room, frantically texting, likely checking the terms of their lease at Westview Terrace. Aunt Patricia approached next, her recovery complete and social engineering in full swing. Rachel, darling, this is simply marvelous news. You know, I always told Robert you had a good head on your shoulders, just like your grandfather. Very clever keeping it quiet, building your empire behind the scenes. Her revisionist history was breathtaking in its audacity. Did you? I must have missed those votes of confidence over the years of being referred to as poor Rachel behind my back, I replied, keeping my voice level. Aunt Patricia's face reddened slightly. Well, I never used those words specifically, she backpedaled. We were just concerned about your future. Uncle Robert finally abandoned his attempt to resume the meeting and marched over, his expression a complex mix of anger and calculation. A private word, Rachel, he said, gesturing toward a quiet corner of the room. I followed, keeping a safe emotional distance. What exactly is your game here? He demanded, once we were out of earshot. If this is some kind of revenge play because you felt slighted over the years, it's extremely unprofessional. I met his gaze steadily. There's no game, Uncle Robert. I'm a real estate investor who made a sound business decision. The fact that you and others happen to be tenants in my building is coincidental, though I won't deny it adds a certain poetic justice to the situation. You could have told us about your success before blindsiding everyone like this, he insisted. We're family. Would you have done the same? Or would you have used the information to your advantage, as you're trying to do now? He had no answer for that. Our conversation was interrupted by my cousin Emma, Uncle Robert's youngest daughter, and one of the few relatives I'd always gotten along with. Unlike her siblings, she'd never participated in the family's materialistic competitions. "That was badass," she whispered, giving me a quick hug. "Dad's head nearly exploded. I've never seen anything like it." Her genuine delight was refreshing amid the calculated responses of the others. As I moved through the room, I noticed the family had organically divided into camps. Those who had been the most vocal in their judgment of me over the years were now huddled defensively, while those who had been kinder or simply less interested in status began approaching me with genuine curiosity about my business. My grandmother, who had been quietly observing from her seat at the table, motioned for me to join her. At 86, she remained sharp as ever, though she rarely intervened in family politics. "Come sit with me, Rachel," she said, patting the chair beside her. I complied, feeling suddenly tired from the emotional exertion of the confrontation. "Your grandfather would have loved this," she said, her eyes twinkling. "He built his business the same way, you know. Quietly, methodically, letting results speak louder than words. I hadn't expected this revelation. I thought Grandpa was always successful, even from the beginning." She chuckled softly. "That's the story Robert likes to tell. The truth is, your grandfather started with nothing and built everything through smart decisions and hard work. Robert inherited a successful business and has been riding that wave ever since." She squeezed my hand. "You remind me of him more than any of the others. He would be proud." Her words meant more than all the backpedaling and sudden respect from the others combined. As the initial shock wore off, practical questions began emerging. Derek approached cautiously, his earlier mockery replaced with businesslike efficiency. "So, about the building management. Will you be changing companies or procedures?" It was the first legitimate question anyone had asked. "I'll be reviewing operations over the next few weeks," I replied. "My priority is maintaining the quality of the property while ensuring it remains profitable. Good tenants who pay on time and respect the property have nothing to worry about." The implied message wasn't lost on him or anyone listening. After 2 hours of navigating this new family landscape, I found myself emotionally drained. The satisfaction of finally being seen had been sweet initially, but was now giving way to a complex mix of emotions I needed space to process. I made my way to Uncle Robert, who was still attempting to maintain his patriarchal position at the head of the family. "I'll be leaving now," I informed him. "I have an early meeting tomorrow with my property management team." The implication that we would be discussing Westview Terrace wasn't lost on him. "Rachel, I hope this revelation doesn't change the nature of our family relationships," he said stiffly. "I know things haven't always been perfect, but we're still family." I considered his words carefully before responding. "You're right, we are family, but from now on, that relationship will include mutual respect. I've earned it." I gathered my belongings and said my goodbyes, ignoring the many attempts to engage me in further conversation. As I waited for the valet to bring my car, I caught sight of my reflection in the hotel's mirrored wall. I looked exactly the same as when I'd arrived, yet everything had changed. The cool evening air was a relief after the emotional intensity of the conference room. I slid behind the wheel of my Honda, the car I'd been mocked for keeping despite my financial ability to upgrade many times over. Now, it felt like a badge of honor rather than a source of shame. As I pulled away from the Grand Wellington, My phone began buzzing incessantly with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, and voicemails poured in from family members who suddenly had urgent things to say to their previously invisible relative. I switched the phone to silent and focused on the road ahead, my mind replaying the events of the afternoon like a movie I couldn't pause. The drive home became a journey through my emotions, rather than just city streets. Initial triumph gave way to more complicated feelings as adrenaline faded. Yes, I had finally shattered their misconceptions about me, but at what cost to relationships that, despite their flaws, were still part of my life's fabric? My decision to remain in my modest apartment despite my wealth suddenly made perfect sense. This was a sanctuary, a place untouched by family drama or pretense. I kicked off my shoes at the door and collapsed onto my comfortable, well-worn couch. The first person I called was Tanya. "Well?" she answered eagerly. "Did you drop the bomb? How did they react?" I laughed, the tension of the day releasing slightly. It was exactly the earthquake you'd imagine. One minute I was poor Rachel who couldn't afford a house. The next I was everyone's favorite, successful relative they'd always believed in. I recounted the highlights of the confrontation, from Uncle Robert's disbelief to Melissa's immediate pivot to networking attempt. "God, they sound like cartoon villains," Tanya said when I finished. "Are you okay, though? Really?" The question hit me harder than expected, and I felt tears forming. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me feels vindicated, like I finally stood up for myself after years of subtle degradation. But another part feels sad? Like, why did it take revealing my net worth to earn their respect? And do I even want relationships that are contingent on financial status?" Tanya was quiet for a moment. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or, in your case, the $60 million question," she added with a gentle laugh. "You've exposed a painful truth about your family dynamic. Money shouldn't determine someone's worth, but for many of them, it clearly does. The question now is what kind of relationships you want to rebuild, if any." As we talked, I scrolled through the messages flooding my phone. Most were transparent attempts to reposition themselves favorably in light of my revealed wealth. Uncle Robert had sent a formal-sounding text about being proud of my entrepreneurial spirit and suggesting we discuss synergies between our business interests. Melissa had already invited me to 3 different social events where I would meet the right kind of people. Aunt Patricia wanted to feature my inspiring success story at her next charity gala. The naked self-interest was almost comical in its transparency. But there were a few messages that felt genuine. My grandmother had sent a simple text. "You stood your ground with grace. Lunch next week?" Emma asked if I wanted to grab coffee and hear about her new nonprofit work, with no mention of Westview Terrace or my wealth. Blake sent a gif of a mic drop with the message, "Most entertaining family conference ever. Respect." These messages felt like potential bridges to more authentic connections. After saying goodnight to Tanya, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, thinking about my mother. She had passed away before my investments began to truly flourish, but she had laid the foundation for everything I'd achieved. I could almost hear her voice. "Money doesn't make you better than anyone else, Rachel. It just gives you more choices. The real measure of wealth is what you choose to do with those choices." Mom had never been vindictive, even when the family treated her poorly after Dad left. She maintained her dignity without becoming bitter, a balance I was still learning to strike. The weight of being a landlord to my own family members suddenly felt heavy. I had the power now to make their living situations comfortable or difficult. I could raise rents to market rates immediately when leases renewed, or I could be accommodating. I could prioritize their maintenance requests or delay them. But weaponizing my position would make me no better than they had been when they held social power over me. I made a decision then, sitting in my quiet apartment surrounded by the modest comforts I'd chosen for myself. I would treat my relatives exactly the same as any other tenants. No favoritism, but no retribution either. fair market rates, responsive maintenance, professional interactions. My property manager would handle most direct communications to maintain appropriate boundaries. I would not use my position to punish or reward, but would simply operate my business ethically. As for personal relationships, those would need to be rebuilt on new foundations of mutual respect if they were to continue at all. I opened my laptop and drafted an email to my property management company about the Westview Terrace acquisition, specifically noting that several units were occupied by my relatives and establishing clear protocols for handling those relationships professionally. I scheduled a meeting for later in the week to review all leases and property operations. Once business was handled, I turned my attention back to the personal fallout. I wouldn't respond to most messages tonight. Emotions were running too high, and I needed time to process my own feelings before engaging with theirs. I did send quick replies to my grandmother, Emma, and Blake, accepting their invitations for future conversations. These connections felt worth preserving and potentially strengthening in the aftermath of today's revelation. As midnight approached, I prepared for bed with a strange sense of liberation. For years, I had carried the weight of my family's misconceptions and judgments. While I had never doubted my own choices, their collective disapproval had still affected me more than I cared to admit. Now that weight was gone, replaced with the responsibility of navigating this new terrain where I was suddenly visible, respected, and in some cases feared. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, from managing newly complicated family dynamics to integrating Westview Terrace into my existing portfolio. But tonight, for the first time in years, I would sleep without the shadow of being the family's poor relation hanging over me. That alone felt like wealth beyond measure. 6 months passed quickly, each day bringing small adjustments to my new reality. The family ecosystem, disrupted by my revelation, gradually settled into a different pattern, like a forest regenerating after a necessary fire. Some relationships withered while others flourished in unexpected ways. The annual family conference transformed most dramatically. Uncle Robert reluctantly acknowledged that after 30 years of hosting, perhaps it was time for new blood to take over the tradition. When no one else volunteered, I offered to host, suggesting we refocus the gathering on genuine connection rather than status competition. My first act was moving it from the Grand Wellington to my recently acquired lakeside property, a rustic, yet comfortable venue that emphasized natural beauty over opulence. Winter sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as I arranged the final details before guests arrived. Tables were set with elegant simplicity, name cards deliberately, mixing family factions to prevent the usual cliques from forming. A photograph of my grandfather stood at the entrance, along with a quote from him I'd discovered in his old journals. Success isn't measured by accumulation, but by contribution. Tanya arrived early to provide moral support. "Nervous?" she asked, helping me adjust a centerpiece. "Surprisingly, no," I replied. "For the first time, I feel like I'm engaging with my family on authentic terms. Whether it goes well or not, at least it's real." The first to arrive was my grandmother, her eyes approving as she took in the transformation of the family gathering. "He would have loved this," she said, nodding toward my grandfather's photo. The view, the simplicity, the focus on people rather than pretense. Uncle Robert arrived next with his wife, their demeanor noticeably subdued compared to previous years. Our relationship had been strained but civil since the revelation. As landlord to their temporary residence, I had maintained strictly professional interactions, neither punitive nor preferential. When their forever home was finally completed 3 months after our confrontation, they moved out of Westview Terrace with minimal communication. "Rachel?" He greeted me with a nod that fell somewhere between grudging respect and lingering resentment. "Lovely property." "Thank you, Uncle Robert," I replied warmly, determined not to perpetuate old patterns. "I'm glad you could make it." As other family members arrived, I observed the subtle changes in how they approached me. Gone were the condescending comments about my career or lifestyle choices. Instead, there was an awkward deference that, while preferable to disdain, still didn't constitute genuine connection. Only a handful engaged with authentic interest in my life, beyond my financial status. Emma had become a regular presence in my life, our monthly coffee dates evolving into a genuine friendship. Unlike her siblings, she asked questions about my business strategies not to benefit herself, but out of real curiosity. In turn, I became a supporter of her nonprofit work, providing both financial backing and strategic advice. Blake and I had rekindled our childhood closeness, our shared discomfort with family politics creating a natural alliance. He had recently started his own business, declining his father's offer of a position in the family company, a decision I wholeheartedly supported with both encouragement and angel investment. Most surprising was my relationship with Melissa's 13-year-old daughter, Lily. Following the revelation, she began emailing me questions about investing, having secretly started a small stock portfolio with her allowance. Our correspondence evolved into mentoring sessions where I taught her the financial literacy her parents had never prioritized. When lunch was served, I stood to address the family, conscious of how different this felt from my position at the far end of the table 6 months ago. Welcome, everyone. Before we eat, I wanted to share a few thoughts about the purpose of our gathering today. For many years, this annual conference centered around achievements and acquisitions, measuring success in square footage and luxury brands. A few uncomfortable shifts in seats around the room. Today, I'd like us to try something different. Under each of your plates, you'll find a card with a question. After we serve the main course, I invite each of you to read your question aloud and share your answer. These aren't about material success, but about life experiences, lessons learned, and moments that shaped you. The meal progressed with initial awkwardness giving way to tentative engagement. When the time came for the questions, something remarkable happened. My stoic Uncle Philip spoke movingly about his greatest regret. Working so much that he missed his children growing up, Cousin Derek, usually focused only on financial conquests, revealed his dream of becoming a teacher before family pressure pushed him toward banking. Aunt Patricia shared vulnerability about her insecurity driving her social climbing. Even Uncle Robert, when his turn came, offered unexpected insight. My question asks about the most important lesson I've learned this year, he said, clearing his throat. I suppose it would be that I've conflated net worth with self-worth for most of my life, measuring myself and others by financial yardsticks rather than character. Recent events have made me reassess that approach. His eyes met mine briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between us. As the afternoon progressed, I observed my family members relating to each other with gradually increasing authenticity. Not everyone participated fully, and old habits occasionally surfaced, but the shift was undeniable. When most guests had departed, I found myself on the deck overlooking the lake with my grandmother and Tanya. You've changed the family dynamic, my grandmother observed, not just by revealing your success, but by how you've handled the aftermath. I'm still figuring it out, I admitted. Some relationships may never recover. Uncle Robert and I are cordial at best. Melissa still treats me like a networking opportunity rather than a cousin. But others have surprised me, she nodded wisely. Wealth is a magnifying glass. It doesn't change who people are. It just makes their true natures more visible. The ones worth keeping in your life are those who saw your worth before knowing your net worth. Her words crystallized something I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. Financial success hadn't created my problems with certain family members. It had simply exposed existing dysfunctions while creating space for healthier connections to form. In the months since the revelation, I'd expanded my real estate holdings, but more significantly, I'd expanded my definition of wealth. True richness came from relationships based on mutual respect, from using resources to create positive impact, and from the freedom to define success on my own terms rather than through others' expectations. The sun began to set over the lake, casting golden light across the water. "What's next for you?" Tanya asked, sensing my reflective mood. "Professionally, I'm exploring impact investing, particularly in affordable housing. Personally, I'm learning that setting boundaries doesn't mean cutting ties, and that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting." I watched a pair of birds soar across the darkening sky. Mostly, I'm trying to build a life where my net worth and my self-worth exist in separate categories, each valuable in its own right. As twilight settled around us, I felt a deep gratitude for this journey, complicated as it had been. The family that had once diminished me had inadvertently pushed me toward creating abundance on my own terms. The ultimate irony was that in calling me poor, they had revealed their own poverty of understanding about what truly constitutes wealth. What's your definition of true wealth? Is it measured in dollars and cents, or something more meaningful? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of personal growth and unexpected victories. Thank you for joining me today, and remember that sometimes, the greatest power comes from quietly building your own success rather than seeking others' validation.